Hi there. Further to my discussion of Gnosticism and the here and now, I wanted to call this video "The Here and Now is All That We Have Got," which is a cliche, I know, but is true nonetheless. But I wanted to put the experience of the here and now, which I have said here is the source of all good, and the source of all that there is, in the context of what we know or what we can observe about the world of nature, in particular the human world. And that's represented by this pentagram, but it also has three arms extended underneath, to show further connections and what we might call subcategories. So, it's a certain way of observing or looking at the world. I know that. Perhaps a kind of pessimistic way of looking at the world. I think Gnostics tend to be rather pessimistic people, which is why it sort of suits my psychology, because I'm a pessimistic person. And but recently, I've also talked about the fact that metaphysics uh, could be part of the problem rather than the solution. And I reiterate here the falsity, the fantasy, the fakery, and the futility almost of metaphysics and metaphysical speculation. That is to say, speculation about the nature of God and soul and the existence of God and soul as things that might have personality or location or time, or even importance. And I've said before that, these things like soul and God, these labels, are signposts towards a greater reality, or metaphors, indeed, for the here and now. But they also could be metaphors for the future. And I think it's possible to take metaphysics as a metaphor for some of the futurist philosophies, existential philosophies that started in the 1920s, when people were pretty optimistic about science and technology and the evolution of man, or even before that, with a certain Hegelian attitude towards the evolution tending towards the pinnacle, which was, of course, Germany in Western Europe, which is highly kind of dubious criterion on which to base the idea of evolution, anyway, because as we saw from the 1940s, this great German peak of civilization descended into total and utter barbarity under the Third Reich. In any case, I was almost thinking about Christian metaphysics, which is quite futurist in a sense when you think about it, because sort of through Jesus, we have a future, and that future is eternal life. And without Jesus as a doorway, if you like, into that future, we don't have any future at all. So you could argue that even Christianity has a futurist element. It's looking at the future, rather than any kind of sort of any kind of here and now, indeed. Although people do pray to saints and pray for deliverance in the here and now, in their from their present situation, if appropriate. But I've also argued that metaphysics is a metaphor for the here and now having the highest value. And people say to me, well, why don't you simply become a Buddhist? But the problem with Buddhism, as I see it, is it's absolutely inundated with superstition and metaphysics and metaphysical speculation, especially Mahayana Buddhism. But even Theravada Buddhism has its Buddhism as an ism, rather than just simply saying that the here and now is of ultimate value. And if we concentrate on the breath, on our breath awareness, we can attain awareness of the here and now, even on a temporary basis, or indeed a temporary basis, since I agree with Buddhism, everything is impermanent. Therefore, but I still think that the problem with becoming a Buddhist is you've got all this sort of superstition, and the Tibetan Buddhism is so muddled up with Bo religion, with ancient religion, ancient sort of Tibetan paganism, that even though they talk about form and emptiness, and they try and sort of explain away their metaphysics and their superstition, by saying indeed that it is a metaphor for um, uh, the Buddha nature and the development of Buddha nature, the cultivation of that Buddha nature, which is based on an experience of the here and now, or largely. I still think that, I'd rather strip everything away to its bare minimum, which is basically through breath awareness one becomes aware of the here and now, exclusively to all else, but not entirely exclusively, because as I've shown here, the experience of the here and now is all wrapped up in our experience of past, present situations, which we may or may not like, and future worries and fears, or future anticipation. So it isn't here and now isn't transcendental in the sense that we can sort of pop off and float around in a sort of pink bubble, and not be aware of the three F's of this world, which are fury, frustration, and fear. Fear extends to the future. Fury is of the past, and frustration is of the present. And I know you're going to say to me, well, I don't feel any of these things. I don't feel furious about the past. I've let the past go. I don't feel fearful of the future, because, we haven't got there yet. And I feel satisfied with my life as it is now. And I don't feel frustration. But what I'm saying is that these qualities underline the qualities that, uh, underline the realities of our psyche, which are very much based on fear, frustration, and fury, the three F's, if you like. And these three F's, of course, account for the three devils, the three pillars of devilry for this world, which is dishonesty. And by that, I also include delusion and self dishonesty. Incompetence, we see that every day, all over, everywhere, and insanity, of which there is a lot. And these are the three pillars which Muslims throw stones at during the festival, where they circumnavigate the Kaaba at Mecca. And they've got these three pillars which they throw stones at, representing the three devils of evil, which are intent on enslaving humankind, as a sort of symbol of their rejection of these devils. Anyway, so going down, of course, to the actual to think about the past. One of the things that Gnosticism does draw your attention to as a body of thought, is this rather poetic way of putting it, that the canvas of the present is painted with the blood of the past, and its image is one of violence. This reminds me of a saying by the Order of Nine Angles, a satanic organization, that he who sits upon the highest pile of human bones will see the farthest. In other words, what it's saying here is that if you look around you now at your computer, even at the roof of your house, at the walls, at the carpet, everything that you have now is based on the accumulation of old wealth. And that old wealth was accumulated through slavery, primarily, through exploitation, manipulation, predation, and as I said, slavery. And we are here where we are now, because of war, because of slavery, because of strip mining, because of insensitive colonization, and oppressive colonization. And I'm reminded actually of Fyodor Capra's vision that he had when he was on a plane once, I looked down at the wing and at the jet of the turbine under the wing, and he saw all these little black children being sucked into this turbine and chopped up and strewn out the other side as pollution. And that represented to Capra the fact that the developing world is in fact exploited terribly and always has been by Western Europe. And we are as rich as we are. We're living in relative paradise because of the sacrifice of the developing countries, who, by the way, mostly still have not even had one COVID-19 inoculation, never mind two. And we're thinking about having our boosters in this paradise that we live in Western Europe and the USA. It's enough to make a dog whine, isn't it, really? Anyway, but of course, sitting on the highest on the highest pile of bones is quite interesting because it's almost like saying, well, who cares? Like it has a sort of idea of the future being established through the horrific acts of people that had been done in the past. And our history is bloody and deeply stained, as the song says. So that's another thing to think about. And when we talk about the past, we're also thinking about science and technology, the efficiency of science and technology, the relative efficiency of science and technology versus the cost of that efficiency. And people may say to me, well, again, you're taking a negative view because a lot of the times now science and technology are attempting to reduce the cost of its own efficiency. But in the past, of course, science and technology was virtually insensible to its costs and just went ahead anyway, regardless of the cost, in a sort of naive kind of pell-mell way towards human destruction. And the cost, of course, of science and technology ultimately is the planet itself, is the ecosystem. But admittedly, science and technology are much more sensitive now to the cost, but not that much more sensitive. So there's always going to be a tension, if you like, a dialectic between people not really counting the cost of scientific and technological development against the efficiency of doing things in a scientific and technological way. And through innovation, we become more efficient and we become better at doing things. But as I say, at some cost or a great deal of cost to life and limb and ecosystem. So we come down here. Those are the main points which the here and now is sort of wrapped up in, as it were. Awareness of the here and now is also wrapped up in the fact that we are blind to the worst that is yet to come. In other words, the answer to every oracle is death. But we just sort of people take a blind sort of Nelson's eye, a blind eye to the things that will come. And indeed, a lot of people in Western Europe are astonished at the idea of death and the idea of suffering, and it will never happen to them, sort of thing. And when it does, they're astonished. When their baby dies of something, they're astonished that this can happen in Western Europe, and they sort of have breakdowns and everything because they can't take, they're so shocked by the sudden occurrence of something catastrophic, which you would think would not happen in the Western world, and indeed COVID-19, of course, it can be seen as this surprising and extraordinary pandemic, which has claimed so many lives and will claim so many more lives directly or indirectly as time goes by. And we could almost fly into a rage over the sudden loss of expectation that we might have when we look around us and find and realize that we don't have much protection, in fact, from the ravages of nature. That nature is red in tooth and claw, and it doesn't matter how much technology you surround yourself with, you can still come amazingly unstuck. So that's another point. And then finally, yes, this is an interesting point. If you, oh yes, and the thing about psychic vampires, I suppose this rises from the point about insanity. It's a subcategory of insanity. But there are people that are slowly trashing their lives in order to suck resources from the people around them, directly or indirectly, which is, I suppose, a definition of a psychic vampire. Psychic, in the sense that psychic is a word that's symbolic for emotional, financial, social resources, and these are all sucked into the complex needs of the psychic vampire as they suck vitality out of the people around them. And as it says here, if you meet one of them, just run and don't get involved if you can. But of course, you know, again, people will say, well, it depends on what lesson we have to learn. Our life situation, for example, if we are in contact with a psychic vampire, it could be that we're meant to have this experience and grow from it and grow stronger from it. I mean, we might grow stronger from it, even if the vampire does not grow stronger, because ultimately, of course, the vampire is heading for oblivion, heading for the abyss. Whereas those the victims of the vampire could actually be heading towards the pinnacle of wisdom as a result of their contact with this abhorrence, as I might call it. And of course, you know, it tests one's compassion. Vampire, the psychic vampire, is a wretched creature and cut off from the source of infinite love. Can only do what it does out of some sort of horrific instinct, which is embedded in it genetically, or which has come to look on as um, a valid pattern of thought and behavior, which is vampiric in its nature. Um, and the final point here really is is about the internet itself, which is almost a subcategory of vampirism. It's the overstimulation of only two of the five senses, and that's the problem with the internet, especially with social media. I mean, other parts of the internet which are about information and shopping. Well, shopping is part of consumerism, which Gnosticism rejects. And there's too much data everywhere. A lot of it's conflicting data and misinformation. And there's so much of it that your mind is overwhelmed by the too much information, which indeed, you know, could lead to personal disaster or disaster within the community. I mean, it's often been argued that 9/11, which happened 20 years ago this year, happened because there was too much military intelligence coming in to the CIA, and they couldn't see the wood for the trees, and they couldn't see the obvious. They couldn't see what was going on in the USA itself because they had too much information, and they couldn't filter it properly. And this was why they allowed the terrorists to organize themselves for the attack against Twin Towers. So the internet is an overstimulation of only two of the five senses. I think we need to go out and look at touch and smell and taste again and re-experience and maybe use these experiences, smell and physicality, to bring us again into the here and now. So breath awareness is one thing, but I think you need to go into some kind of physicality or connection with nature in order to attain the here and now. So I present these points to you really because I want to put the here and now and experience of the here and now, breath awareness, within the context, a wider context or the widest context of living in this world. And the world is reduced to the here and now through transcendental meditation, but you're also brought it, become more aware of the problems of the world as it is. And even though on a temporary basis you could change your perception and your cognition with regard to the here and now, And I've said before, there's a certain amount of falsity attached to fear, fury, and frustration. That if you change your switch in your brain, you can ameliorate the effects of frustration, fury, and fear by changing your cognition and your perception. But positive thinking can only go so far, and always we will return to the three F's of this world, which account for insanity, incompetence, and dishonesty. And they will from this will arise exploitation, manipulation, and predation, which is the bloody past on which we draw our present, and indeed perhaps our future. Nevertheless, I think there is a futurist metaphor to be drawn from all this, and futurism remains an interesting idea, and transhumanism, remains an interesting concept. But in Gnosticism, we're always very wary because we say that, however futurist or enlightened you are, there's always going to be the convolutions and twists of the world within your brain. I mean, the convolutions of the brain itself, the physical convolutions, are symbolic of the convolutions and complexities of the human world, which will always prove to be a bunch of banana skins to slip, over which we will slip at some time, no matter how sure we are that we're not going to slip, because the world itself is fundamentally flawed, and you can't, you won't expect, you shouldn't expect too much from the world, and I suppose psychologically speaking, it's a matter of expectations, and changing our expectations, which will lead ultimately to a psychological stability of sorts, despite all the horrible things that the world represents and is. And all this perhaps will arise from a regular practice of the here and now, uh, practicing the experience of the here and now through breath awareness, through pranayama, or breath control, as it's actually technically supposed to be called, but we can't call it breath control because the hippies don't like it. They like to call it breath awareness because it's more fluffy. But it is breath control. Yama means control, and prana means breath or before breath, which is a subject that I could wax lyrical on for another whole video, and I may do that because it's part of this whole, perhaps this whole Gnostic way of life that I'm alluding to at the moment with this video. The here and now isn't utopia. It isn't a magic wonder stick. It isn't a magic wand that's just going to make everything perfect. You can't make everything perfect by definition in this world. Whatever but it may temporarily make you look at the world in a different way, and may shelter you perhaps from the ravages of despair, which might overtake you as you consider all the things that I have considered during this video.